when you're doing growth marketing, some of the mistakes that are made are decision makers asking for too creative ideas. Now, creative ideas, they are great, but as a company, if the basics are not correct, you need to start there. You can't come up with the weirdest, most extreme growth hack and then do that if, for example...
Welcome to today's episode of How Startups Grow. With this podcast, we help founders launch and run a successful startup by giving them actionable insights that help them succeed. This podcast is brought to you by Performato, the startup marketing agency. This is How Startups Grow.
Welcome to this episode of How Startups Grow. So today we're going to talk about growth hacking, growth marketing. What's the basics of it? When do you use it? How do you use it? If this is something you're interested in, stay tuned. Let's go. Dennis, good to be here again. Good to have you in my house. Let's get started with it.
Yeah. Can you define what growth hacking is and how it differs from traditional marketing efforts?
Yeah, so growth hacking is a relatively new thing, which is quite different from marketing, actually. So growth hacking and marketing, growth marketing sometimes are used interchangeably, but that's not correct. What growth hacking is actually about is that the company works together to experiment as quickly as possible to find out which company strategy, which growth strategy is actually going to cause the most effect, most positive effect.
So what is the difference between growth marketing and how does it integrate with or differ from growth hacking?
Yeah, so growth hacking is what you use as an entire company, whereas growth marketing is more from the company team. So I'll give an example to illustrate the difference. With growth hacking, you could, for example, do experiments with the product itself, the software product, for example. You could do experiments with the sales team. You could experiment with the marketing team still, but you can work together. So the team consists of product people, sales people, marketing people, data people, etc. Growth marketing is just about marketing and optimizing the marketing efforts. So it's just the marketing team that's working through experimentation in those.
So the big difference between growth hacking and growth marketing is team-wise and company-wise. But is there also a difference in strategy, in goals or execution?
Yeah, it depends how far, which one you're choosing makes you choose how far along the funnel of a user journey you're actually going to experiment. So in growth hacking, you could, for example, look at retention, product onboarding, customer success, monetizing people that are coming in. Whereas with growth marketing, you can think about it, but it's actually slightly out of the scope. Marketing there is more focused on generating high quality leads, for example, high quality users, getting new users to sign up on the product. Now, there is a little bit of a mix in there. There's some overlap. So for example, onboarding new users, it's in the product where it's happening, but it's often the marketing team that's also talking about it and also working with it. So there is some overlap, but marketing is more focused on the top of the funnel and growth hacking is more focused on the entirety.
Okay, got it. So can you also explain how growth hacking and growth marketing differ from A/B testing?
They're not really different. They're more just different things. So A/B testing, that's experimentation that you're doing. And in growth hacking and growth marketing, you do experimentation a lot, actually. Now, in growth hacking and growth marketing, you're not using experimentation on its own as a term. You're using a term called rapid experimentation, which means you're going to test many different things and you're going to test them as quickly as possible. The fundamental idea here is that if you experiment a lot in a short amount of time, you will have small improvements and those small improvements stack up to create exponential growth. That's what you do with growth hacking, how it differs.
Growth hacking is actually A/B testing, but more rapidly? Or does it differ in more ways?
Yeah. The process is, your execution is rapid A/B testing in a way. But there's also slightly different thought in the mindset behind it, where with A/B testing, you're more zoomed in on is version A or version B going to perform better. With growth hacking, you're trying to formulate and try to define, pinpoint the ideal growth strategy for your company. And that ideal growth strategy, you're learning it while you're doing it, basically. So it's very fluid. And your goal with growth hacking, yeah, it's growth, but you are working through the assumption that growth happens through rapid learning and learning a lot about your business, about your customer.
Okay. So for a startup just beginning to explore growth hacking, what are some essential first steps they should take?
First of all, you need to set up your growth team. Now, this is something you can talk a lot about the growth team that you're setting up, so we should save that for a different podcast in entirety. Second off, there is leadership buy-in, which is very important. Because with growth hacking, you're going to experiment quickly, and an experiment means that you're not sure about the outcome. And most of the times, directors, managers, C-level people are demanding a certain level of result. So your target may be, if you're a marketing team, it may be the amount of leads. If you're a sales team, it might be conversion on leads to customer. Your product team, it might be onboarding or retention percentage. Now, you still have those targets, but when you're doing growth hacking, you cannot be as sure as the result you're going to reach. Sometimes it just takes a bit of time. And there's a very important thing in growth hacking, which is that if you do 20 experiments, let's say, something like that, if you have 4 of those experiments perform really well, like getting a positive outcome, then you could be happy. So you're going to assume that you're going to be wrong a lot. And that takes a lot of mental effort, a lot of change from the leadership team, basically.
So you're also talking now for another episode for a growth team. But is growth hacking only possible when you have a full team, or is it also possible for, let's say, one marketeer?
You can use some of the tactics from growth hacking and do it on your own. You can do that, actually. Now, some growth teams are more mature, some are less mature, some are big, some are small. There's a lot of different flavors you can do there. But growth hacking, you don't really need a full team to do that, but it is ideal that you actually do work with a full team.
Yeah, you'll get results quicker, I think.
You would get results quicker.
What are some tools startups can use for growth hacking?
So the tools that you could use, there's 2 different types. There's models you can use and there's software you can use. So let's start out with the software, actually. If you're doing growth hacking, there is some basic stuff that you would probably need. Now, I would always recommend having an A/B testing tool to test on the website, for example. If you use a more refined A/B testing tool, you can also A/B test on the product. That's a big one already. Then I would usually recommend going with some sort of form software, like Typeform, for example, where you can ask people questions, gather their answers, and do some research among the people that you're talking to. Then I would also recommend there is something, you can Google it. It's called abtestguide.com. If you Google that, you will find a calculator that allows you to calculate how certain you can be if your A/B test is a success or not. Actually, we should put that in the comments. I'll put that in the comments. So that's something you could use. Then you need a visual editor, of course, to make changes, stuff like that. Now, the non-software tools that you could use, I personally use the See, Think, Do, Care model by Google to formulate a customer journey hypothesis even, I should say. And then I'm using the R funnel, fired metrics funnel, you might call it, which is about awareness, acquisition, activation, retention, referral, and revenue, which is very standard in growth hacking to use as well. I use that for the practical execution. Now, what you can do if you combine the customer journey with practical execution, then you can actually formulate experiments with that. So I'll give an example. Let's say I'm doing the See, Think, Do, Care model. In the C phase in that model, you're thinking, how do people learn about their problem, that they have a problem? That could be linked to the awareness stage. So you might say that I'm launching an hour registration tool and people have the problem that they have a hard time tracking how many hours they're working for which client. Then I could write, for example, a blog post about it. I could do social media marketing about it. And then you have the combination of the customer journey requiring a step and you doing an actual practical thing to get people through that step. And that's how you build the customer journey there. That's how you build a growth hacking inspired customer journey, I would say.
Okay. So what is the difference between, would you say this is like a tactic or a growth hack or a growth strategy?
This is more the philosophy behind the strategy even. So if you do this correctly, then you can use everything you learn in this way to build the growth strategy. That's the method more of it.
And what are some common growth hacks then?
There's a lot of growth hacks around actually. So I can mention a few famous ones. One of the most famous ones is what Airbnb did when they were launching. So they were new. and they had to get people into the apartments that they wanted to rent out, and they had to get people to rent out their apartments as well. And they used something where they took a lot of data from Craigslist, I think, then in order to actually reach people. And they didn't have much traffic, and through the traffic from Craigslist, they actually got it, which is just working around it in a very creative way. Another thing Airbnb did as well is when they noticed that the booking rates were not that high, they were hiring professional photographers, and they were sending those to the people that wanted to rent out their apartment. And the idea that was, if the photos are better, we're going to get more people to sign up. It was true. So they got much better sign-up rates from it. Another famous growth hack is, if you remember Hotmail, if you're as old as I am, in Hotmail, you had a link at the bottom of an email which said, get your free Hotmail address or something like that. That's how they got sign-up. So if you were sending emails, then that got added to the email itself, and that got a lot of sign-ups for them. So they forced referral on you. The same thing with Dropbox, another example. If you had Dropbox and you invited your friends, for every friend that created an account, you would get like 1 gigabyte of data, storage space. That's another growth hack as well. It's about finding creative solutions to solving problems that every business runs into, such as acquisition, retention, referral, stuff like that.
And then are growth hacks the same as growth tactics?
Sort of, yeah. Yeah, they're the same. A growth tactic, I think, is a little more commonly applicable than a growth hack. And also a growth hack, when you talk about this, there's something in the minds of people that's actually not that correct about it. They think of a growth hack as being this over-the-top creative technical idea. And it's like almost the word hack is in there. So a lot of people think that you're almost hacking a system or something to make sure it works. That's not true. A growth hack is actually just a growth tactic. It's something that you're doing that is going to cause you more growth than not doing it. That's a growth hack.
So in your experience, what are some common mistakes startups make when trying to implement growth marketing strategies?
So when you're doing growth marketing, some of the mistakes that are made are decision makers asking for too creative ideas. Now, creative ideas, they are great. But as a company, if the basics are not correct, then you need to start there. You can't come up with the weirdest, most extreme growth hack and then do that if, for example, you've never tested your headlines or your value propositions or layouts of your website, stuff like that. So start with the basics, start working those out correctly first, and then move to more creative, more extreme growth hacks. That's one mistake that they make. Another one they make is a trap where they try to over-optimize or perfectionize. They become perfectionist about the experiments that they're doing. The idea from growth hacking is that you do rapid experimentation, which means that not every experiment is going to look like the ultimate end product that you're going to do. Speed is better than perfection in this case. It's about learning. And that's another mistake I actually see quite often.
And those mistakes are only for growth marketing, or are they the same for growth hacking in general?
These are actually quite the same for growth hacking and growth marketing. Now, a mistake that I see with growth hacking specifically, which would be a little different there, is that a lot of the experiments are going to be focused on whoever is in the team. So if you create a team with 5 marketeers in it and 1 product person, then it's going to get you a lot of marketing experiments. So that is something to think about. And then another thing that the growth hackers usually do not that great of a job of in comparison to the growth marketers is their scope is bigger. So it's a lot harder to decide what you're going to focus on. And that could make it so that you're also having a harder time figuring out the highest impact experiments that you can do.
When would you advise a company to do growth hacking, and when would you advise a company to do growth marketing?
In my experience, it depends on 2 things. One is the team that you have available, and the other one is the decision makers in there. Now, if the decision makers, if they're all comfortable doing growth hacking and experimentation, then yeah, you can start growth hacking immediately. But what you often see is that, especially product leaders, it's either in terms of execution harder to experiment in products, or in their mindset, they have a roadmap already. They don't want to diverge from those roadmaps. They want to stick to it. They're already doing agile product development a lot of the times, and then it's much harder for them to implement something like growth hacking as well. So if you're decision makers are not mature enough, you should start actually with growth marketing. And then if that works, you can use that as a sort of case study within the organization to prove that the method actually works. And then you can start adding other teams as well.
So it makes more sense to start with growth marketing and then evolve into growth hacking throughout the whole company.
Yeah, only if your entire team is not ready yet. If your entire team is ready, you can just start all out growth hacking immediately.
And you would also advise that at that point?
If you can do it,
Yep.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Are there any tools or frameworks people should look out for when they're starting with growth hacking?
So the ones I just mentioned are quite important, the See, Think, Do, Care and the R funnel, I would say. Other than that, we have the episode about A/B testing. I think we discussed a lot of it in there as well. And we discussed something called the A/B test card, which is a card with which to define your experiment. Now that could also help you quite a bit. And then other than that, I would recommend using growth hacking in a form of sprints. So every 2 weeks, I would say with growth hacking, you're defining new experiments based on what you've learned in the previous sprint. If you do it like that, you have a cycle of working that occurs that you can use as well.
Could you go more into detail about these sprints?
So in a sprint, the idea is that you remain flexible. So you make a plan for 2 weeks and you have a backlog with a bunch of experiments on there as well, some of which you want to do immediately, some of which you don't. And every 2 weeks, you talk with the team, you have a growth leader within your team, and you decide which experiments are next. And with a growth sprint, every 2 weeks, you decide that as a team, you look at the data, you discuss what have we learned from this, and then you say, do we need to repeat other experiments or do we need to take new experiments from the backlog? And then like that, you can always select the highest impact experiments with the team. So it's a way to keep a bit of an agile mindset as a growth team, to be adaptable as well. And then one important thing that you do need for this is that the growth team needs to have a goal. And a goal could be that in the following 3 months, we're going to improve conversion from onboarding to customer, for example. Something like that could be a goal.
Yeah. So how can you measure success in growth hacking and growth marketing?
Yeah, over the long term, don't fall into the trap where you're looking at success from one experiment, because one experiment in growth hacking does not matter. It's about the totality of experiments because you're doing rapid experimentation. So success in growth hacking should be taken, like I said, if we set a goal for the upcoming 3 months, and let's say we do 10 experiments per month, we're going to do 30 experiments in those 3 months. If those 30 experiments improved the goal that we were actually set out for, then it was a successful time. But don't look at too few experiments. That's one of the big mistakes that people make actually, because a lot of experiments are going to fail. Even if you're very experienced with growth hacking, you need to come up with ideas, and ideas are not always safe. Like, you don't always know what's going to happen. Otherwise you would just be able to do it. And you're testing things that are not always as logical. It's based on assumption, or it's based on one customer saying something or a few customers saying something. One experiment could be bad, but if you do the totality of experiments well, then it is going to cause growth.
But what about if the first experiment is a huge success?
That's great. Then you can do even more. Yeah. If you reach your target in the first experiment, then you need to set a new target and move on to the next part. But if your first experiment is a huge success, there is a very large chance, very high chance that you actually got lucky with the first experiment, and you would need to do some more experiments to see if you can do even better.
Yeah. Are there some key metrics that startups should focus on when they're doing this growth hacking?
Yes, there are actually, I think there are 2. And that's number 1 would be the amount of experiments run. And let's say the amount of quality experiments run. So quality, it's defined by the team itself, but this is something important so that you don't just test button colors like 50 times in a week. And then other than that, I would actually measure the hit rate, the success rate of experiments, because that is a metric that you want to improve as a growth team over time. You want to be right more often, and you want to be wrong less often, basically. So to do that, you need to also measure your hit rate and improve that. Then one more thing actually with that as well, of course, is you set that target for the growth team every time. And that target, of course, you should measure that as well. But that's an outcome target. But the process target of the growth team would be the amount of experiments and the hit rate.
The amount of experiments. Interesting. Yeah. So this might be a kind of a tricky question, but what kind of results can startups realistically expect from a well-executed growth hacking strategy?
Yeah, this is a very tricky question for two reasons. First of all, you don't know what the results are going to be from your growth team. And you also don't know how well they're going to be doing their job. And you also don't know which metric they're going to focus on, which is the other thing. You make a growth team focus on signing up new users, then expect a positive result in that. If you're going to make them focus on onboarding, then expect a positive result in that. So it's really hard to say what the actual results are. So that's why it's so hard sometimes, actually. I mentioned this in one of the common pitfalls, one of the common mistakes. If the founders, for example, do not trust that growth hacking will work, then after a month, they will probably pull the plug and say it doesn't work. So it requires trust from the organization in the method. You can look at case studies to see what has happened in the past with following this method. It's quite unpredictable to say what's going to happen when you're starting growth hacking.
Yeah. Would you also say that growth hacking always takes some time to see results then?
Usually does. Yeah. Not always. I've had cases where, like you said, when the first experiment is a success, I've had that, yeah. But sometimes you do 10 experiments and 2% growth and it doesn't matter. It just feels like it's not working. But you have to keep working at it. If you trust the method, then you know that the results are going to come in time.
Yeah. Would you recommend like a minimum amount of time to do the growth hacking, or that this also depends? Like you were talking about the sprints, but in total?
I would do a minimum of 6 months for sure, because the team needs time to get started with growth hacking. Also, if you don't have growth hackers within your team, you might have to hire some, or you want to train your people, or you want to work with an agency that can help you train your people with that. So that's something to think about. And then also I would say within those 6 months, let's say they would have to do 30 experiments, something like that, so that you also know that there has been output and not just time.
I can also imagine like the best result you're getting at least is knowing what doesn't work.
That's actually the same, yeah. So actually this is an interesting thing when you think about what is success in experiments. Success is, yeah, it's growth. Of course it's growth, but there's also something else. And that is learning what doesn't work, like you said. So actually what you should judge your growth team on would then not be the amount of growth, that would be the amount of things they have learned. Because then a learning of yes and a learning of no are both good. In theory, that sounds really nice, but in practice, of course, you want real results as well. So you would look at both, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Can you share any case study or example where growth hacking or growth marketing significantly impacted the company's growth?
It's something that Elon Musk was involved in. It was PayPal, actually. So what you would get with PayPal is that if you got one of your friends to open a PayPal account, I believe, if I remember correctly, you and that friend would both get $10. You would just get money. Now, that sounds quite absurd, where they're just giving away money. But when you think about it, that money is actually customer acquisition cost. And if your customer acquisition cost without referral would be $50, and then with referral, it would just be $20, that's quite amazing. And this is how PayPal actually grew extremely quickly over a very short amount of time by offering this crazy referral incentive. That's actually not crazy at all.
I think it's also implemented by a lot of Bitcoin wallets and that kind of things right now.
Yeah. Referrals are a tactic that have gained a lot of interest over the past decades, and for good reason. With PayPal, it worked well. With Dropbox, it worked well. With Hotmail, it worked really well. So referral was something very interesting when you're looking at growth hacking.
How sustainable are growth hacking techniques in the long run?
They should be extremely sustainable. And that's the thing. You're focusing on learnings. And there's an interesting difference between growth marketing and regular marketing. So a regular marketer might create a campaign, and the campaign might be related to something. It might have a start and an end date. A growth marketer, they still use campaigns, but those campaigns are used for creating a more sustainable strategy. because you're testing. And when you're testing, there's a few things that you look at. Now, some of those things are the experiment needs to be repeatable, and you're looking at something that is scalable so that it doesn't work in just one place, but it works in many places. You're looking for a reliable outcome so that you're quite certain that the outcome is actually true. And if that's true, then you can just repeat it over and you're going to be sure of the outcome. Very different from an actual campaign from a regular marketer, actually.
How many companies do actually implement growth hacking, do you think?
A lot of companies try, but don't succeed for mainly the reason that I just mentioned a few times, where the management structure does not allow the ambiguity that comes from growth hacking. It's, if you can really trust growth hacking, if you have a strong growth leader, then you're going to get an organization that trusts it, and then you can actually do it. But I have noticed there are a lot of people and a lot of organizations that claim to do growth hacking, but they're really just doing an A/B test once every while.
If this episode was meaningful to you, be sure to follow us for more content about building a business. Thank you for listening to How Startups Grow.